Okay, this is part two of my episodes 13 to 16 predictions. And what I'm going to be doing here is doing episode 15 and 16. The title, the synopsis of each one, and what I think it may mean. So, episode 15 is called Try, Try, and it states when life within the walls begins to mimic life outside, the group realizes that sheltered life may not be possible. Definitely a very revealing episode title, and I think that it really plays into what what we were seeing in the comics. Um, if you're familiar with the comics, what happens in volumes 12 and 13 is that Rick's group is really trying to acclimate into the community, but they see that some practices that the group goes about doing are things that remind them of the past, particularly Pete Anderson. And I think this is definitely going to be a big plot point. I made a video on Pete, so I'm not going to necessarily do an entire thing here. If you want to know more about Pete, watch my Who is Pete the Surgeon video. But Pete Anderson is basically a doctor in the community who has a wife, Jessie, and a son, Ron. And Pete basically ends up abusing his wife and child. That's just something that he's been doing, unfortunately, for a very long time. And Rick wants to put a stop to it, but Douglas in the comics tells him, no, he's a doctor, we need him, and unfortunately I have to look past this because we can't, lose him. And when you see this, I think about, how the group would react to what was going on in Grady Memorial, where the cops were being abusive to many of the wards, and Dawn turned her head, and didn't say anything about it. So I think that that is something that may be a mimic of life outside. You see things like that. You also see, I think, Rick and the group potentially not trusting people and people not trusting them in turn. And I think that, it's going to be a very, very, very long time for these two groups to trust each other. It takes a little bit of time in the comics. And it only through a couple of events do they actually come together as a community. And even then, it's still a little for a while shaky. So, excuse me. Excuse me. So it's going to take them a little bit of time to come together. And I think that what we're going to see here is those things like the Pete Anderson story, people not trusting each other, and we may perhaps run into the wolves in this episode. Or, maybe there are some signs that they are around. Or, some people might go out on a run and then run into them or see them and hide from them. You never know. But I think that it is very possible that it's situations like that which are going to make the group think that maybe this isn't, a utopia community. This isn't necessarily a safe zone, like many people want to think. Because again, like I said in part one, I think that some of the group members of Rick's group are going to, want to acclimate into this community and become almost like what a civilized person was before the Walking Dead world began. And I think you're going to see the temptation for some people in the group to regress back to that stage. But once they start to see these signs, then they're going to start to realize, oh yeah, I remember now. Yeah, there was a governor, and there was Terminus, and there was loads of walkers, and there was bandits, and there was this, and there was that. And we can't forget about that, and we never can. And even within the walls. And one thing that I was thinking about, especially with Rick, I think he's going to be thinking about Shane a lot when it comes to people like in the group mimicking. Where we're going to see, what certain people are willing to do in order to further their interests. Because if you remember, Shane was willing to sacrifice Otis in order to get back alive with the medical supplies. He was willing to kill Randall in order to lead Rick out into the woods or into the field and kill him, and basically go back and be like, yeah, Rick died on, Randall killed him, I killed Randall, and now I'm gonna get back with Shane. I'm gonna get back with Lori and Carl. I'm gonna take control of this group. And I think that, if anything, this is gonna be the episode where the Pete Anderson situation, if they play it in the comics, if they play it in the TV show, which I'm pretty sure that they will, that this is where it's gonna come to a head. Where, Pete's gonna do something like he does in the comics, and somebody may die as a result of what he does. Because in the comics, Rick ends up attacking Pete, and then Rick, basically is put, they're split up. Rick and Pete are separated. Pete is separated from his family. Pete doesn't take that well. He takes a knife, goes after Rick, and accidentally kills Douglas's wife, Regina, which results in Pete dying. Now, they may change that up a little bit. It doesn't necessarily have to go down like that. Pete might kill somebody and continue to live in the community for a little bit longer undetected, or he might go outside the walls. I thought about that. What exactly could things be mimicking? And it could be a little bit of Shane, but it also could be a reminder of Andrew. I often thought, what if Pete would sabotage the entire community? And what if he's the one that breaks open the walls and lets in a bunch of walkers? Because in the comics, they end up meeting up with these bandits, which I think are the wolves. And Rick's group is basically able to take out the bandits, saving everybody, but the gunshots attract walkers, and the more walkers that come, basically it results in the walls collapsing in a couple of parts, and walkers just fill the entire community. And I often thought, well, maybe we might see the situation happen with the wolves. That might happen before Pete's, the resolution of Pete's story. And what if Pete would be the person that, instead of, going after Rick, that instead he would sabotage the group and let the walkers in the hopes that it might kill several of them, and then he can basically return back to a state of, being the helpful doctor that's needed and become a bigger leader in the community. That's a possibility. And I think about that, mimicking outside the different kinds of things that can happen that will basically remind Rick's group just how dangerous the world is, even when they're behind closed walls, and how you're also going to see these groups coming together. Because they're going to realize for the first time, or, maybe just in a long time, because even in the comics, there were still some things that happened in the Alexandria Safe Zone, with, I think it was, Davidson, I think his name was, Douglas's arch rival. You see things like that happening, and I think that, they've experienced things, but those things have either been few and far between, or it's just been a long time since it happened. But I think that these kind of situations will bring the group together, which leads to the season finale episode. The title is Conquer, and it states, Daryl finds trouble while on a run. Rick and the group feel like outsiders in Alexandria, where trouble approaches the gates. There's a lot in there. Definitely a lot in there. Which leads me to think that, maybe it will be that the Pete Anderson story gets solved in Try. I mean, there are a lot of things that can happen, because I think that what you're going to see in this last half of season 5 is, you're going to see the Pete Anderson story. You're going to see perhaps the wolves / the bandits from volume 13, led by a guy named Derek. coming and trying to enter into the community. And I think that we're also going to see walkers invade the community. I think ending right where volume 14 ends in the comics, I think is a very good way for them to end the story this season. And I think they will do that. Whether they will or not, we'll have to wait and see. A lot of people are questioning, are we going to meet Negan? Are we going to see this? I don't think so. I think it's way, way, way too early for Negan. And I know that we're all anticipating him. I know I am. But I'm also one of those people who realizes that Walking Dead can't move too fast. And I think that if we get to Negan before we meet the Hilltop, I think that that's going to spell a lot of trouble for the show. I think we need to wait until, in my opinion, I wouldn't even introduce Negan until the end of season 6. But, even if he gets introduced in the middle of season 6, it wouldn't be too bad. I wouldn't have a problem with that. If anything, you'd even be better off, introducing him sometime in the later half of season 6, but not necessarily the finale. Because I think that it would be beneficial to start that storyline in later season 6. But I think that for now, what you see is Daryl finds trouble while on a run. That could mean that he runs into a big group of walkers that are coming towards the community, just like what happens in the comics. And Andrea in the comics gets trapped in the bell tower when the walkers come to the community. So this may be the story where, instead of it being Andrea trapped because Andrea's dead, Daryl would be the one that's trapped. And Daryl would make his way up to the top of a building, something like that, and people would go out and rescue him, maybe. So that's a possibility. Or he could be running into the wolves or the bandits from volume 13. He might run into them, and as a result, they use him as like a bargaining chip to, be like, hey, let us in or we kill your man. And of course, Rick's group would miraculously save Daryl, because if you kill Daryl, we riot. I will be on the front lines with that if they kill Daryl. It's not time to kill Daryl. It's never time to kill Daryl, So I think they will save him, I don't think it's going to be the end of Daryl's story. But there's those are definitely the possibilities here. With Rick's group feeling like outsiders, I think that what that's coming down to is, as a result of the Pete Anderson story and maybe a couple of other things that the group members do, people aren't willing to trust them, or people are or even more, perhaps insisting that Rick's group leave the community. There may be a push towards that, where they're going to be asking Deanna to kick them out. So I think that's a definite possibility there. So I think that that's why it's more likely that we're going to see the Pete Anderson story being the thing that mimics life on the outside, maybe reminding Rick of what Shane did. That might be more of what we see. And then the last episode is going to be dealing with, they're going to want to kick them out. They're going to want to get rid of them, maybe. And what happens is the saving grace of the bandits and the walkers, when trouble approaches the gates. I think that's a mixture of the wolves / bandits and the walkers, where they're going to take out the bandits, and then all of a sudden the walkers are just going to come in. And that's going to be where, the group is going to have to come together and fight in order to survive. And if you also have heard, the finale is going to be 90 minutes. I was so happy to hear that. It definitely is a lot to fit in. But I think that with the 90 minutes, as long as they don't load it up with commercial breaks, I think that it's perfect. And I'm definitely glad they decided to go with a 90-minute episode. I'm definitely excited about what is to come. I think that those are the main stories that they are going to incorporate. And I think that these titles and the synopsis of each episode is pointing towards that. Now, of course, I think they will throw in some twists. I don't think that it's going to be an exact play-by-play. but I think that we will see a lot of those storylines in one way or another being used, and I definitely cannot wait to see what they have in store. So that's all I have for today. If you guys have any questions or comments, don't be afraid to leave them. Feel free to subscribe. I do have more videos coming. And if you guys have any suggestions, any video topics that you want to see, don't be afraid to make some submissions. I appreciate any suggestion that anybody has. And I really do appreciate each and every one of you that has been watching the videos and who has subscribed. I never thought that I would be getting 100 subscribers and a couple videos with over 1,000 views. I never thought that could happen. And I just want to thank each and every one of you. Thank you, thank you, thank you. I hope you all have a wonderful evening, and I'm looking forward to Sunday. Have a good night.